I was perfect the first time. Now I have a no will.
It's done. All right. It looks like it's recording now.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is sponsored by Codify, a California benefit corporation. Visit Codify at www.codifi.com. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 105 for March 1st, 2017. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, we talk about the side hustle, surviving in today's archaeology, and staying for the future. So, go learn something because the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now. Welcome to the show, everyone. Joining me today are Bill in Arizona.
Good morning.
Chris in Oregon.
Hi.
Doug in Scotland.
Good evening.
Stephen in Calgary.
Hello.
All right, so on today's show, as we mentioned in the introduction, we are talking about the side hustle. We're going to identify what that means. We're going to identify the problem. We're going to talk about how you can do a side hustle, what that even means for you in the second segment. And then we're going to talk about why we need to do a side hustle. We're going to get into a little bit in the first segment as well, but I think we're going to try to do some problem solving on the other side of the third segment. So, but first off, what the heck is a side hustle? What does that even mean? I'm going to throw this over to Bill White in a second because he's been doing a lot of blogging and talking about this on social media, and it really boils down to the fact that, and I'm very fond of saying this, and I want to be corrected if people don't believe me, but or don't follow what I'm saying, is that archaeology, if you just come into it, I don't care what your job is. I don't care if you're a professional or commercial or whatever, archaeology, or where you're working, actually, where in the world you're working. Archaeology is not typically a 9-to-5 Monday through Friday job where you're going to have 3.2 children and a white picket fence and a house in the suburbs. Okay, I just don't think that it's really ever going to be that way. Now, for some people, it is that way. These people might be later in their career and they may have gotten lucky and found a solid regular job. Those are often government jobs, things like that. But if you're in the private sector, that's going to be really difficult. If you start your own company and you think that's how you're going to get a 9-to-5 job, good luck. Working 8 hours a day is a dream that will never happen. So anyway, that's where we're at. That's where we're going, and that's what we're going to talk about. We've got a lot of comments on this and a lot of different experience levels across the board on this podcast today. So I think we're going to have a pretty solid discussion. So Bill, why don't you kick it off, and we have some links to some of the stuff you've been putting up in the show notes, so go check those out. But Bill, you put up a blog post lately, and you and I have been talking about this for a long time, and you've been actually blogging about kind of the side hustle and talked about it on this podcast a lot in the last couple of years. So, So what are your thoughts on this to help kick off the discussion?
Yeah, this really comes from a blog post that I posted on February 16th called All Archaeologists Need a Side Hustle. So what I meant by the side hustle, contrary to what you might believe, it's not a dance. It's not, I guess it is some kind of a dance, but you're not really moving your feet only unless your side hustle is dancing. What I'm talking about is using your spare time, the time that you usually sit around and binge watch Game of Thrones, to actually do something that might bring some income into your life. So, there's basically two different kinds of side hustles. You can have something that you actually have to invest some time. So, becoming an Uber driver or pet sitting or something like that. Yeah. So there's two different kinds of side hustle that I identified, specifically things that you can do in your spare time that actually require you to do something. So getting a part-time job, something like that. Or the one I advocate the most strongly is doing something that creates residual income. So doing something online that creates income while you sleep. So creating websites or apps, or doing some other kind of consulting, some kind of product that other people can buy, and that can generate some income. So that's really what I meant when I said creating a side hustle.
Okay. Well, let's talk about why we need to do this. What is the problem? I've done over 60 episodes of the profiles in CRM podcast, and I've got some data from that. But I think we'll go over to Doug real quick.
Yeah, I think we should get this out of the way early in the podcast. And for listeners out there, what Bill is talking about is how to survive in archaeology as it currently is. And it's not about how we want it to be. And I think that's something we're going to talk about in the third segment. But I remember, Bill, what was it, about 2 years ago, year and a half ago? This isn't the first time you've mentioned a side hustle in one of your blog posts. There was one about archaeologists and a poor mentality. And you got ripped into pretty heavily on Twitter. And a lot of people took offense to the idea of needing a side hustle. And I understand that. I think really it is a shame that we have to have a side hustle. And I think we should talk about that in the third segment. But just for people who are listening, what we're really talking about is we're not agreeing that this is, how archaeology should be, but we're telling you this is how you can survive in archaeology. And I think this also goes back to some comments that have come up through different podcasts we've done. I remember when we were talking about CVs and stuff, and people got quite offended when I told people, if you're a woman or minority, don't put your first name on
I remember that.
on your CV. And some people understood that's it's an unfortunate thing. That's how you survive. It's kind of like telling don't be black in front of cops. Like it's one of those things. Unfortunately, that's what it is. And we're giving right now advice about how to deal with that. And hopefully later in this podcast, we'll talk about how you can possibly change that so we don't have to give this advice of having a side hustle.
Nice. That's a good point, Doug. And I'm sure we will get into that. And as I was starting to say earlier, a couple people are, like you were alluding to, Doug, people are kind of pissed off that we even need to think about this, because they're like, well, why can't I just be an archaeologist, do my job, and get a paycheck, have benefits, go on vacation, have a family, and do all those things? And that's a pretty good question, but unfortunately, nobody has answers to that, right? I mean, we have some answers on why that is now, but as we'll talk about later, I'm not sure it's fixable because of the complexity of the problem. But that being said, there are some things you can do to help sort of mitigate it. But let's talk about the problem a little bit more, because this is what really comes up in social media, especially on Facebook posts and things like that, is the problem. And people often talk about, as I mentioned in my Profiles in CRM podcast, I always say, what's the, if you could fix one thing in CRM archaeology, what would it be? And nearly everybody says, I would have better pay and more benefits and more work. And I'm like, I was just commenting to somebody the other day on Facebook, and I was like, as far as more work and pay goes, there isn't a single archaeology company out there. Let's leave aside the massive engineering firms for right now, because they have different sort of budgeting things. But if you're talking about an archaeology firm, big or small, there isn't a single one where the owners or principals are out there driving, brand new fleet of Teslas or Porsches or whatever your fancy car is of choice and living in a mansion, because they're not paying you very well. They're taking all your money and just putting it into their own things. That's simply not happening. They're often, they're often a little better off than you are, because they're more stable. They own the company. They do have steady work, because everything that goes through that company comes through them as well. So there's that. But and there are people that do very well, and there are people that do screw employees. But I think on the in general, when we talk about averages, when we talk about the average employer, I think most people are just, I think they're honest, and I think they're just trying to do right by their company. They want to stay alive. They want to survive. And there's another problem too, and that's business training. None of them have it. So they're trying to run a company. They get these big projects, and they don't know how to do anything. They just can't manage it. So anyway, I know you guys have some comments in the background there. I don't want to monopolize this, but Doug, you said you do have answers, so let's have them, because everybody wants to know.
Wait, you want to take this at this section right now? Not wait to the end?
Well, at the
Okay.
end, I think we want to talk about bigger, like more systemic problems in like the field of environmental science. I think we want to go bigger that way. As far as talking about the problem right now, I think we can tackle some small things here. I don't know. There's no
Oh,
real
mine's-
format. This isn't NPR.
Okay, mine's big level stuff. All right, so if you look at how the CRM system is set up, it is essentially, and this is across most countries across the world.
Hmm.
We're relatively new profession. You know, uh, some countries started in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. Like there are some countries that have just started to get their first sort of CRM archaeologist. Um, and essentially, we're a bunch of small organizations. Now, there'll be, an archaeology unit in one of the large companies that do, pipelines and, internal consultants and stuff. But for the most part, in CRM across the world, unless it's there's a few countries where it's all government run, and so it's one entity, and they tend to have better pay. But essentially, you have a bunch of small organizations who are competing against each other, and this will either happen naturally, or archaeologists needs to go out there and start making this happen. But really, we need to consolidate. So there should not be half a dozen companies in one state. At most, there should maybe be two. And as soon as you consolidate, you're going to get rid of these issues of money. And then you're also going to get you're not going to totally get rid of them all, but you will be able to solve some of the issues of constant, oh, I have a job for 2 weeks. Oh, I have it for a month. I move from company to company. Because the larger the company is, the more projects they have. And if you're good and they want to keep you on, they'll have projects to keep you on. Because let's face it, most employers, if you're an excellent field tech, they want to give you work. They want to keep you around. They don't want to go through the process of having to look through 200 CVs or resumes,
Hmm.
conduct phone calls, all that stuff. It takes a lot of time. So you really are looking at something like that. And then once also you consolidate, you're looking at unions. Unions have failed, but they fail pretty much because it takes a lot of work to get all the companies involved. But archaeology anywhere in the world is actually one of the easiest professions to unionize in that we're location based. You can't send our jobs overseas. You still physically need someone out somewhere surveying and excavating.
Hmm.
So that's what you basically need is you need actually a lot of consolidation. Now take care of issues of pay because then you'll be able to get a union, and it'll also take care of issues of undercutting because there'll be less competition, so people can raise rates. Um, and that's actually what you need to do to fix most of what people are talking about in issues with archaeology. Now, this is not going to fix every issue as well. But I mean, usually when you get larger companies, you actually get an HR department. So
Hmm.
a lot of the issues with sexism, racism, any of the isms tend to go away because larger companies have someone there. I'm not saying this is a silver bullet for everything, but in general, larger companies will have more strict rules and clamp down, or at least have someone you can go to. Like it's
Right.
really hard to talk to someone about oh, you're being racist when it's actually the company owner because there's only 10 people working in the company, um, and there's no one else you can go to.
Let's comment on what you said so far because there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
First off, on the one hand, I agree with you that that larger companies are actually kind of better for archaeology because they have better pay, they can afford the resources, they can use other departments to make up for the archaeology department or the cultural resources department when it has a slowdown, and that way people don't get laid off. You know, they have things to do, and they have they have income because the rest of the company's helping pay for them. I get all that, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure in the long run that that larger, like if you had just a handful of large companies, that they would solve all the problems because one of the big things, especially regarding money, is most of these large companies are publicly traded, right? So publicly traded companies have shareholders, and they have these earnings calls every quarter, and they have all these things that they do, and if they're not increasing their their revenue every quarter, then their stock goes down. And if their stock goes down, then all hell breaks loose, and they start losing people, and now they have to lay off people, and they have to lose whole divisions, and blah 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 blah. But the
Hey,
smaller
Chris.
companies, they don't have that. They don't have that because they're not trading on the stock market.
Chris, do you mind if I clarify?
Go ahead.
When I'm saying large companies, I'm actually talking about what would be mainly classified as small or medium size and mainly medium size. Because if you look at So in the UK, the largest archaeology company, there's a couple of them, but they range between about 250 and, really good years, 350 employees. That's actually a pretty small company just pushing medium status.
Mm-hmm.
In the United States, I think the largest I've seen in numbers is maybe 100 archaeologists, maybe 150. Those are all considered small companies. And when I'm talking large companies, I'm not talking about, 10,000 archaeologists. I'm talking actually mainly about larger. And
Mm-hmm.
so in the sense that we need medium-sized companies, in the couple of hundred people spread over 2 or 3 states with minimum competition. And of course, the other side of this is it's becoming more likely because you could get economics of scale if archaeology moves ahead with technology. So, Chris, I know you've talked about um, trying to do everything digital and stuff like that. But if you think about we still use a lot of the methods that we used, 50, 100 years ago. We still use a trowel, a shovel,
Mm-hmm.
anything. Um, and if you progressively so the other side of this is you progressively have to have SHPOs or, council archaeologists if you're in the UK saying, no, we want a higher level of technology, which means, you have to go out and buy, I don't know, XLF um, scanner or, all these other things and actually push up the level required. And so that there's the investment. And so unfortunately, this is actually going to probably piss off a lot of people is those sort of lone, sole trader, independent people should actually be priced out of the market. And they should actually have to, to become an archaeologist and start an archaeology company should cost, $500,000 or $1 million to buy the equipment you need, as opposed to you go down to Home Depot, pick up a shovel, a screen, and that's it. You're in business to become an archaeologist with a clipboard and a pencil. Um, you know, you need to that's the other side of it. If you really want to get this where not everyone should be able to be an archaeologist. And that actually means we'd have fewer people being archaeologists, but they'd probably be higher paid because there'd be
Mm-hmm.
a higher level of technology and specialism.
Right.
So I'll shut up now and let other people talk.
Right. Well, we're going to go to break here soon. But I will say that the whole large company thing, if you're going to, I guess you're right, Doug. You do have to qualify how you define large company. If you're defining it on employees, that's one thing. If you're defining it on the standards that that like government contracting defines it on, I believe it's $14 million in a lot of cases. Sometimes it's like $9 million, and that's annual revenue. That's how they determine where large company starts is over that price, which puts out probably 95% of archaeology companies, at least in the United States. And then that leaves the massive engineering firms whose own archaeology departments are not actually doing that much revenue, but the whole company is. Like your AMEC, Foster Wheeler, HDR, all the big companies that are out there. They have those kind of numbers because they have other departments. But let's pick this up on the other side of the break. Professional Certifications for Scientists, or PCS, aims to provide practical educational videos, field guides, knowledge tests, professional certifications, and employment connections to professional scientists everywhere. Check out the jobs page for job listings in contract archaeology. Post a job for just $50. All of PCS's jobs are verified and checked for completeness. Find PCS jobs at www.pcscourses.com/jobs. PCS, a place for good scientists to become great science professionals. All right, we're back. And before we left, Stephen had a question following up on some of the things we've talked about. So, Stephen, go ahead.
Thanks. And this is mostly directed at Doug's long narrative. It strikes me that this consolidation idea, or many of these ideas that we have about how we can have more stable jobs or more stability in our jobs, and with greater pay and things like that. This still kind of raises the specter of the sheer number of jobs, or the lack of a number of jobs, that we are constantly, as we always like to talk about, we are constantly churning out more people with degrees, and developing that and streamlining, more and more people with MAs or greater, thanks to these professional development programs and stuff like that. Um, and it's we're also increasing our efficiencies, right? So we are streamlining the data management process, using electronic tablets and drones and stuff like that. So even though we're using more and more technology and being more and more technical, we we're basically increasing our efficiencies, and that results in fewer jobs or shorter periods of employment. So I guess maybe not a question so much as a comment, but or to phrase it as a question, it's like, how do we deal with that then? If there are fewer jobs, that stability won't necessarily um, result in jobs for everyone.
Yeah, I'll just make a comment. There will be fewer jobs. CRM archaeology at the moment is incredibly labor intensive. And everyone's like, oh, robots are coming for jobs. But actually, robots could, in theory, replace some of what we do almost right now. Like, so out west in the Western United States, we essentially do pedestrian survey, which means it's a walkover. There's very little shovel testing, if anything. You could literally send out a drone, record the ground, pop it into a computer, and do identification of artifacts. Because essentially, we're just walking along with our eyes and looking out there and saying, oh, I see a piece of pottery that looks like a flint. But you could program a computer to recognize those. I mean, we're only a couple of years away before that tech happens and someone figures out a way to do it. And I imagine actually someone else will figure out to do it in something else other than archaeology, but then it'll hit the market and archaeologists will use it. And that will literally mean almost no pedestrian survey other than sending one guy out, well, probably two for health and safety, with a drone to fly, hundreds upon hundreds of miles. And that is an efficiency, but it means that there's going to be definitely fewer jobs. And the real risk of that is everyone does the efficiency, there isn't consolidation, and basically we just cut out those jobs without, raking in that benefit. So when you do efficiency, there's more resources that go somewhere else. And unfortunately, we probably will just hand those resources back to our clients instead of keeping it for archaeologists. That's, I suspect, would be happening, but maybe not. Maybe we do keep that. But there are going to be fewer and fewer archaeologists in the future doing CRM. That doesn't mean there's necessarily going to be fewer archaeologists. Public archaeology is getting bigger and bigger. There are a lot of other things. I don't know. Maybe we'll all become podcast stars and pay the bills that way. Hint, hint, Chris.
Yeah, right.
But there are other things. It's just that I don't see a future where there's going to be a big increase in CRM jobs just because we're going to figure out ways to eliminate the labor. That's not necessarily a bad thing as long as those resources go into something else in archaeology, and
let's comment on that, because I don't think any industry in the history of industries has ever continuously added jobs, except for maybe restaurants, because we all have to eat, right? So there's always new restaurants. But industries, they ramp up and they say, okay, look at this huge thing we're doing. Now we need all these people to help make it happen. And then somebody figures out a way to make it more efficient. And then they start eliminating jobs because of that. Look at the auto industry. I mean, the auto industry employed so many people just 40 years ago, and now it's all robots, right? So that's the way it goes. And I'm actively trying to figure out ways to. I was just out last week out on some land, trying to figure out ways to make drone survey actually work for pedestrian survey in the West, because I think it is the way to go. And I am all for there being fewer jobs, because fewer jobs mean that the people that are left are actually the people that not only want to be there, but are the high quality, high end people. This is my hope anyway. Obviously, this doesn't always happen, but these are the people that are, ready to perform. They want to be there, and we can weed out the people that are just here bitching and complaining and saying, nobody loves me and I can't get any work. Well, that might be true. So go work somewhere else, because there's 25 people behind you that are passionate about this and really want to do it, and they understand what it takes.
Chris, that is not how life works.
I know that's not how life works. I
You do
understand.
not get rid of you do not get rid of the worst people. Those are usually the people that stay around. Um,
But my
those
point
are the ones
is,
that
with the right employers, they won't be able to stay around, because if we start really supporting these people that want to employ really good people, we support them online, we support them whenever we can, and we say, listen, that employer over there only hires really amazing people, and they don't hire the people that just phone in their work, that just come in every day and say, I'm going to do the minimum and then go home and drink a beer. They don't hire those kinds of people. So if we had more employers like that, then we could actually do this. And I understand it's all, blue skies sort of will never happen kind of stuff, but you have to have an ideal to strive for, right? You have to have some sort of benchmark to try to hit.
Well, there's a serious question about that, and Bill's been talking about that in the background about professionalization. So, Bill, I think this is a good point for you to define professionalization. And I mean, there's several examples of regions where professionalization is a standard practice. So, especially in the Southwest. So, Bill, let's hear what professionalization is and how it works.
Yeah. The last time I talked about professionalization, though, somebody found me at a conference, and then I think they lured me with a beer and then ripped me in half because they said that my ideal of professionalization was ridiculous, and that would mean that people end up spending, a third of their lives in order to get qualified and all this stuff. But following along with what Chris was saying, and I think Doug, you also are familiar with this. In the Southwest, the bar is like, dizzyingly high to work here, and you don't really see a whole bunch of job posts. If you see a job post on archaeology fieldwork for a position in Arizona, then you should actually really question it and try to think about why they would even be doing that, because both the universities here, Arizona State, well, all three of the main state universities crank out a lot of high quality people who graduate. The professors are, on target when it comes to archaeology. And within the state of Arizona, there's a huge network of people who know each other, and they're really only looking for people who actually have experience in Arizona. And in New Mexico, it's even worse. Like, you have to have experience in certain parts of New Mexico, and that also, I mean, that's even going to the tech level. So if you're a tech and you won't just think you're going to hop in your car and drive to Arizona and then just hand your resume in, I'll be the first one to tell you that that's going to be really hard. You're not going to get hired because you don't know anything about Arizona. And so they're really looking for people who have experience in Arizona, different parts. It matters, prehistory, historical. I mean, they're really particular, and it's a similar situation in New Mexico. So New Mexico State and the University of New Mexico, they do a really good job with archaeology. And so in those zones, you have to not only have education, you have to have experience. And to get to like the project management stage where everybody really wants to be, because that's where you have the best odds of having a stable job, um, you got to have, like, I can't even remember. The Arizona State Museum is the one that hands out the survey and the excavation permits on public land. So that's state and federal land. Um, and like, to be, each project has to have a principal investigator that has, I mean, it's not, I don't think, codified specifically in law, but it's understood that you will have 10 years of experience, basically, a PhD, and will have done like a 640-acre survey or like a 20-mile linear survey that you have, from research design, proposal, and reporting, done pretty much as the main author. There's, that pretty much sets it up so that many of the professors in the state of Arizona can't even get an ASM permit. I mean, you have to be dedicated and have been here for a long time in order for you to get to be a principal investigator on a project. And so the survey permit is handed to the PI or the company, and each company has like maybe one person that qualifies to do that kind of stuff. So as a result, the situation is exactly what you're talking about. The people who make it in Arizona are the ones that are dedicated. They probably went to school here. They got education here. They know a whole bunch of people here. They talk amongst the community when they need a new job. Companies hire people from other companies because it's too risky to trust someone out of left field to do Arizona work, because There's no guarantee you're going to know the specific nuances of the area. Now, that's what I'm talking about as far as professionalization. It's pretty hard to just get in your truck and drive from Nebraska and do a project in Arizona that the state museum is going to accept. Now, on private land, that's a different story. You can get away with it on private land, but you're still going to have to follow all the rules. It's just like all the other states. And really, that's how these other Walmart companies can come and do any work in Arizona. But if you're working for the government, it's going to be someone who knows about the state. And I would like to see that kind of stuff happen in every single state so that, you got to know New Hampshire archaeology. Otherwise, you aren't going to get any kind of work there. That's how you can increase wages. That's how you can have some kind of stability. And it does weed out a lot of people. And you're right, there's not a lot of jobs in archaeology in those areas. But vast swaths of the United States do not have that kind of coverage. So if they instilled that in other places, I think that we might be able to come closer to achieving what we're talking about.
Hey, Bill, so you're thinking of professionalism as basically a way to keep fewer people from being archaeologists. Is that correct? Or requiring
No.
a higher threshold of entry, be it years or months of experience?
The goal is to provide stable jobs, right, for people, so maybe they don't have to do side hustles. And I think being a specialist or hyper specialized in a certain area so that you're the only one that possibly can do the work, or you're part of a handful of individuals that can do the work. I mean, I think, isn't that the goal, to have stable jobs? I mean, some of these companies here, people have been here 35 years. And, some of them like teach at universities on the side or have courses and stuff. They publish peer-reviewed journal articles from CRM reports here. So, like,
So,
yeah, they're increasing the quality of the work that's done, but there are stable jobs in Arizona if you can get in.
okay, because that's so it's a matter of terminology because what you're talking about is more of a guild or entry system, whereas the definition of professionalism, which has sort of been set out by a lot of different things, is the standards that people work to. So when we talk about professionalism, we would say, oh, and you dig, your test pits in 1 by 1 meter squares because that's the standard. And that sort of a level of professionalism is not about who does it, it's about what it's done to, and not so much about the experience. So, like when CIFA in the UK talks about it, or RPA talks about professionalism, they're talking more about the standards of work rather than who can do it. Just to say that, like, so that people don't get confused by the different terminology. Professionalism is something slightly different than what you're discussing, but I think your point of, you know, making it a little harder and raising the quality of people who can be an archaeologist is a good point.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of good points that all of you have had, Stephen and Doug, about, especially there being the inevitability of less jobs in archaeology is a problem, but there's also, I think we've identified a need for less jobs in archaeology, or at least a need to raise the bar. And it's a complex issue that we're talking about because there's, top heavy, massive CRM firms, or, massive environmental firms that have CRM departments attached to them, that are bloated with, all sorts of admin and overhead, and people billing to projects that shouldn't be billing to those projects. And then there's the issue from the field tech or crew chief or even middle manager level of, how do we get better pay? How do we get stability? How do we get benefits? All of that. And a lot of the points that Bill was talking about in leading to professionalization and professionalism requires a side hustle. And so sometimes that side hustle isn't going to be archaeology, but Doug, I think you had alluded to public archaeology. I think that public archaeology is an important side hustle that, not only develops us professionally as individuals, but also advances the field and does important outreach, as is our obligation as professionals. But in the beginning of this episode, Bill had mentioned a few examples of side hustle, and some of those are, ways to do passive income or ways to kind of bring it back around to what our main goal is. And I think in the last episode of the CRM, Stephen had mentioned that a lot of professional and personal goals change over time, and so that's another thing that adds complexity to what we're dealing with. Is sometimes our end goal is going to shift as well, and so our side hustle needs to be something that develops us, that is both a generalist strategy but also something that gives us specific skills that make us more adaptable.
And building on what Bill said about the culture of professionalism in the Southwest, people down there know that in order to be in somebody's head when a project is starting, they have to make an impression, and they make an impression, as has been alluded to, by how they work, what they know, what they can get done, and who they are. Whether or not they're whether or not they're a likable person, how many skills do they have? Can they get the job done with minimal bitching? If these companies aren't going to use job posting services, and they're going to use their own network because they have the people to do that, then just by default, the employees working for those companies, especially new people, have to level up their skills. And I say level up all the time, and I've got called out for it on Facebook, but it's a great term. Everybody knows what that means. Leveling up means making yourself better. It's a gamification word. So I think part of your side hustle can be actually not just working at a department store, although you can gain valuable skills no matter where you go if you see it that way. But I think part of your side hustle should be helping you level up, so you can do maybe less side hustle as you progress throughout your career. But I think we're gonna, apologies to the introduction, but we're gonna end up making probably a lot of the third segment here, the next podcast, which will be talking about really fixing some of these problems and really identifying them and coming up with solutions to some of the problems in CRM archaeology. But for now, we're going to go to break, and on the other side, hopefully we can give you some ideas on how to actually do a side hustle and break the suspense you've been waiting for over 40 minutes now. So we'll be back in just a minute. But first, part of leveling yourself up is listening to this next ad from Heritage Business International. And it's not an ad. They don't pay us. This is a partnership because they have really good information and business tips for people wanting to help level up their own business acumen. Back in a minute.
Hi, everyone. This is Christopher Dorr with Heritage Business International, and here's this week's Heritage Business Tip from the archive. This week, we look at an important point about responsibility, profitability, and time management. Delegate to the lowest level of competency. If you don't have to do something, don't. Especially with billable work, push it down into the organization. Regardless of your level in your organization, and a big part of your job is keeping those whom you supervise productive, busy, and billable. To receive our most up-to-date Heritage Business Tip, you can subscribe to our free weekly email at heritagebusiness.org. Until next time, this is Christopher Dorr.
Okay, we are back for the final segment, and as I alluded to before the break, I want to actually talk about some side hustle stuff. Bill's got some good ideas. I've talked about a lot of stuff online. I'm sure the other guys have some things that they've done or ideas that they have. But one of the things that I talked about right at the very beginning of this show was understanding what type of field that we're in and really what that means. So if you're a field tech and you don't work in the Southwest, I say that because the Southwest, a lot of areas down there, you can work largely year-round in some places. In some places in the West, Southern California, a lot of these places you can kind of work year-round. Now, construction in the winter months does tend to slow down even when weather's nice. I'm not really sure why that is, but it's just contracts and the way things work. Government contracts definitely slow down because their funding picks back up in the summertime, and then they have this flurry of activity, and there's all kinds of little reasons for it. But generally, if you're getting into archaeology or you're in archaeology, then you understand that in the winter, just about everywhere you work, you're going to have a little bit of a slowdown, and there's going to be a decrease in the number of people that are working. So I think if you plan for that, you plan for the side hustle, you plan financially to just be out of work in archaeology for 4 to 5 months, you'll be a much happier person because you know it's coming. And honestly, I've always told people too, don't let it happen to you. Like if you're working, and you're on some field project that's supposed to go into the end of December, and then the end of December hits and they lay you off, and you didn't plan, you were just hoping something else would come along, but now it's the middle of winter and literally nobody's going to hire you. You're totally screwed. But if you say, listen, November 15th, whatever day, maybe Thanksgiving, if you want to say that, I am going to stop working for the winter. That's my goal. That's where I'm going to hit my target. And then I'm going to move on, and I'll pick back up looking for work in February or March or whatever time frame suits your needs. But you have to plan for that, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Is what can you do to make up for that 4 or 5 months of lost income? I'll just say right off the bat, one of the first things you can do is save money. That might be hard if you aren't making a lot of money. I understand that, but it is one of the first and easiest things you can try to do is make your finances a little more efficient. And try to put some money away. Again, probably impossible for a lot of people, but not as impossible if you really look at it. And you have to first know how much money it takes you to live over the winter, and then that's your target. Maybe shoot for 20-30% over that, and then go with that. So let's hear some side hustle ideas. Bill, I think you've got some good stuff. Stephen, I think we bowled right over your comment, it looks like. But Bill, why don't you talk about what can people do to accommodate that loss of income over the winter or throughout the year as they're just looking for work?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I think you hinted on a very important part. You need to have a pretty good idea of what you want your money to do and what you need it to do, right? So, a lot of that relies on having an understanding of where you want your life to go and what kind of a life you want to live, and then also understanding that joining the sharing economy, which is something I guess it's pretty much the way the economy has actually always worked, but now they've coined a new term. The sharing economy is really just creating partnerships with other people, basically helping them get things done that they need done for their business. And in the meantime, you get paid, right? So addressing problems that maybe exist or holes or niches, that's a good way to start off on thinking of a side hustle, right? Because nobody is going to pay you to read and listen to books unless you figure out some kind of a way for your reading and listening to books to be something that someone else needs, right?
Right.
So yeah, you can save. You probably actually should be saving any which way. I mean, it makes a lot of sense to save a little bit of your money, at least 10%, and move beyond that. If you can't do that because your bills are too high, that might be one of the other reasons you would want to start a side hustle to bring those bills down.
Right.
So if you've got a car payment or student loans, we all have student loans, right? If there's a way for you to figure out some kind of a side hustle that covers that so that you don't have to spend any of your main income on that, then maybe that's a strategy for you to be able to save. And then, like I alluded to earlier, there's really two kinds of ways that you can do a side hustle. You can something that takes your physical effort. I mean, even passive income is going to take some kind of effort. You have to do something in order to get money back. They don't just pay you to think and imagine, and then you get some money, right? So if you're thinking that you're going to be able to just chill out and binge watch some Netflix and then money's going to start pouring in, unless you're one of the families that's in the Nielsen ratings thing, you're not going to get paid for just watching TV. So you have to do something. There's some kind of action or activity that you're going to end up having to do in order to get the money. Now, that can be an actual physical task, a job, like I mentioned, freelancing, which is selling your services. So if you know how to do document editing, you'd be amazed at how many flyers and advertisements and emails, sales letters that all need to be edited. If you know how to do that, then that's definitely something that companies will pay for. If you know GIS services or any kind of graphic design or something like that, that's definitely something that people will pay you for. If you can do any kind of like consulting, any kind of help. A lot of times companies just need help from someone who has been there and has done that, right? So even students who maybe don't have so much money or so much time, there's ways that you can maybe help local students organize their time. If you finished a graduate studies program, there's a lot of different stuff you can do to help reduce stress or help them through the process. Like I said, if you partner with the university, maybe you could be one of the advisors or consultants that helps them with their graduate students. I mean,
Hmm.
there's no end to the amount of things that you can think of, but my favorite one is to create something that's sold online. So e-products, it's a super crowded market because there's so many different people creating all kinds of stuff of varying quality. But if you can figure out some kind of a way to make something that others will want to pay for on the internet, that's probably one of the best ways to create residual income.
Hmm.
Now, the other thing about the side hustle, the reason why it's not your main hustle is because it's not covering all your bills, right? So it starts off as something to just supplement your income. And then it's really up to you whether you want to increase the scale or build it into something bigger or replace your income. So I created a long bibliography of tools and references that people can download as a PDF, and a lot of those books talk about ultimately getting out of the game. So either you're going to build your side hustle into something that ultimately replaces your income, or you're going to use that plus your main income, and then living a frugal lifestyle to just be able to retire on less money or just retire earlier or something like that. So you know there's a lot of different avenues you can go down as far as side hustle, but the only thing that they all have in common is somebody did something.
Hmm.
So no, you don't just sit there and get money. You've decided that you're going to act. You are going to do something about your situation in life, and you've decided that some kind of a side hustle is what you're going to do.
Yeah, I want to touch on before we go to Stephen. I want to touch on some of the online stuff you mentioned, and I'll have links for these in the show notes. But Upwork is a good one. A lot of people seem to be getting into coding and figuring coding out, and I know Upwork is, and there's other services like Upwork, but at Codify we're using Upwork for coding right now. And what that means is, people put up jobs and they search for people that have listed their profile on these services, and they say, "I know how to do this, this, and this," and then they bid on the job, and they get it, and it's a small task. It might only take them a couple hours. It might take them a few days, but they get whatever they said they would do the job for. And you can do that from anywhere. If you have a laptop and an internet connection, which most people probably do, you can do that. There's another one. I think it's called Fiverr, but I will look this up afterwards and get the thing in there. But that's really for all tasks. You can say, you know, I need flyers folded or something like that, and send them to them, and they'll fold them and send them back. I mean, it's just like stupid things like that. But it's stuff you can do to help make extra money. So Steven had a comment first, so let's go to Steven.
Yeah. And this is kind of going, well, partly way back to when you were starting off the segment, but um, kind of the attitude that I like to carry into work is that there are no real jobs; there are only projects,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of helps to emphasize the limited term, even if you don't think you're limited term. That all positions end. People move on. Maybe you move up. Maybe you quit. Maybe you get laid off because the market's doing really poorly. But there is never a position that will last forever. At the least, you're going to want to retire in 40 years or 20 years or whatever.
Right.
That going in and going into your job knowing that it's short term, even though that short term might be 15 years, helps you to think about other options. And in addition to the stuff that Bill was talking about, and Bill has a lot of great examples. I would say that when I'm working, I'm not necessarily doing things that pull in other money, but I am doing things that are kind of laying the seeds for potentially future work.
Mm-hmm.
That includes being visible, being active, networking, all that usual stuff that we talk about every single podcast. but also, like one of my favorite pastimes is I try to learn a new skill by watching like a YouTube video on Saturday. And I mean, that sounds really stupid, and it is kind of stupid, but sitting around learning Python for 15 minutes at a time on a week, and then you end up at a job and you're like, oh, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
And likewise, so when your position does end, and I don't particularly like the term leveling up, but I mean, but the concept's similar, is that you are always gaining more skills, gaining more
Mm-hmm.
experience beyond, your immediate job.
Right.
Because all these things become more and more applicable to different situations that can arise within your positions. And
Yeah.
and to that end, I would say, don't be afraid to get other quote unquote permanent jobs, outside of archaeology.
Mm-hmm.
Like if your thing is doing GIS and a permanent GIS position shows up, and you want to do it, by all means, jump on it. Go ahead and take it. And even if you want to, keep your hand in archaeology, there are other ways of doing that.
Yeah.
And while you're doing the GIS stuff, you are expanding your exposure and experience within GIS.
Mm-hmm.
And if such a time comes when you end up getting back into the paid archaeology position, you can leverage that towards leverage your skill towards those positions.
Yeah.
And find out just how amateurish most of us are when it comes to mapping.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
I also have a comment about like Fiverr and stuff like that, but I think Doug does as well, and he might be a little bit better about that.
Yeah, we'll go to Doug. Just real quick note on you watching YouTube videos. Just so everybody knows, PCS has a lot of great YouTube videos. Just saying. Anyway, Doug, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, especially with places like Fiverr and like the Amazon Turk and stuff like that. So we're talking about doing side hustles, but don't do side hustles for a loss or for pennies on the dollar.
Yeah.
So a lot of those things, like, so when I was growing up, when people talked about side hustling, really meant drug dealing. But there's that whole paper about how drug dealers live with their mom because they actually don't make any money, and a lot of these different things. So like Mechanical Turk, Amazon's that. I think you make something like
it's terrible.
between $1 and $2 per hour, and like Fiverr, when you're bidding on these projects, or the other thing you mentioned there, Chris, is you have to be really careful because
Yeah.
from one perspective, it's really great. You get high quality stuff for really cheap. But if you're the one doing that high quality stuff for really cheap, you need to think about how much time, you're putting into this and what you're getting out. And I think it goes back to what Stephen was saying. Your side hustle doesn't necessarily need to have money coming out of it, but it needs to have some sort of goal, and you need to be able to some way be able to quantify it, or be able to say, oh, I've started selling Mary Kay, and it turns out it's a pyramid scheme, and I'm making no money, and it's costing me extra money to have a side
Yeah.
hustle. I think that's a huge thing, is always, before you start a side hustle, see at the investment. And I think Stephen has a really good one, is like some of it won't be too tangible. You're setting up new projects. Maybe you're going to set up relationships that will blossom in the future, but don't get sucked into doing all those pyramid schemes and end up working for like 50 cents on the hour or something like that.
Right. You do have to be smart about it. And I'll just clarify real fast, and then Chris has a comment. Amazon Turk, and Fiverr and things like that, they're not really, most of those you don't actually get paid by the hour. You can average that out, but you'll get paid 5 cents per task or something like that. And their thought is, if you can do this 1,000 times in an hour, then you made a ton of money. But the reality is you probably can't. So you really have to look at the fine print, like Doug is saying. It's really important to look at the fine print. And again, another thing I was saying too is don't maybe make this like your thing that you do over the winter, because you will go insane doing it, especially for like Fiverr and Amazon Turk. But if you're sitting there, eating dinner in your hotel room, and you've just rather than have the TV on, maybe have the computer in front of you and run through a task or something like that, and do that every once in a while, and you might build up actually, a nice amount of money to start off your first month of the winter with. That's all I'm saying. Use a little bit of your spare time to do a handful of these things. Don't make it your sole income. Don't make it the only thing you do, because you'll go literally insane.
Yeah, I think one of I would think of it as a more traditional route for a side hustle. And this is something that I think us as anthropologists, like, we have a really strong skill set in writing, in doing research, and in kind of the perspective that we have. And this is a point that I've shared on a lot of podcasts, is that we have a unique perspective as anthropologists. And so freelance writing, I think, is a great way to take in some money. And if you're gifted at writing, and you have kind of a wheelhouse that you can pull from, stuff that you're really strong on, you can write skillfully on. There are a lot of publications that'll pay you anywhere from $150 to $500 for a like 2,000 to 5,000 word think piece. And like, I see a lot of anthropologists that are going to Forbes now, and they have blog columns essentially on Forbes, and they're getting paid for that, and they're it's a great side income, as in addition to some of these anthropologists are professors or CRM professionals, or just independent researchers and whatnot. But freelance writing, I highly recommend it if you have the skills and the means to just quickly and efficiently churn out some writing. And you've got to think about placing a dollar amount on your time. If you can churn out a 2,000 to 5,000 word think piece, and minimize your efforts, then that can really be worth your time to do.
Yeah,
I think the only important thing is not really what you do, it's just that you do something. Because on the one hand, you're doing what you can to get into archaeology, but we've been pretty real about the situation in the market. So if you're not doing some kind of side hustle, or even thinking about it, or moving into any kind of other domain that brings you some kind of income, then there's a pretty strong chance you're not going to survive in archaeology, because it's difficult to get those permanent positions. And not only that, when you get into those permanent positions, this outside of the box thinking, or having other skills that you can add to your company's bottom line, or company's schedule of offerings, that does add to the bottom line. And so you got to do something. I mean, you just cannot sit there and wait. I wish we lived in a world where we all got full-time jobs with benefits, but we don't. So you cannot wait.
Indeed. All right. Well, with that, we are going to end this podcast. We're going to come back with another show in 2 weeks about continuing on this topic, because we have a lot more to say on it. You guys have no idea, you listeners out there, how many comments I've had to shut down in the back chat here just because we didn't have the time. Because I don't want to give you a 2-hour-long show to listen to, because you should be side hustling, not listening to podcasts. But anyway, did I say that? I run a podcast network. Anyway, the point is, go out there, do something. Please comment on this wherever you saw it, and let us know what your side hustle is. I'd love to see what people are doing out there to increase their skill levels. If you don't like the term leveling up, but leveling up is what I say. What are you doing to do that, to make yourself better? What are you doing to make more income? And how are you making this work? So, all right. So we'll see you guys next time, and thanks for listening. That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM-ARC-podcast. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for the episode. You can also email me at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com, or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or tweet your questions with the hashtag CRMArcPodcast, or you can tag @ArcPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to the show wherever you saw it. If you share CRM archaeology-related items on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else for that matter, be sure to use the hashtag CRMArc so the community can see and comment. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Also, please consider donating to the Archaeology Podcast Network. Your donations help fund our bandwidth and contribute to our editing costs. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye.
Adios.
Bye.
Hey, Bueller.
Bye.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and edited by Chris Sims.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.